I'm Anna with Always Right, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Yes, this is the first book in the series that we're talking about. The series is A Song of Ice and Fire, but we're just talking about this one, not these, just this one. Reference, she's thin over here. Now, its slimness is not the reason we're talking about it. We're talking about A Game of Thrones because of the writing techniques, and just the plot, and kind of the mastery of what Martin accomplished in the first book. Don't get me wrong, the other books are really good, but need I remind you, that's all we're talking about, not that. You can do it. A little easier to manage, a little easier for you to digest. So what's the plot? What's going on in it? The quick, very Cliff Notes version is that there's a reunion between the king and his best friend, and then there's like a murder mystery element introduced. And as the plot lines start to develop and kind of diverge from each other, we experience the world of Martin. We experience Westeros. It is slowly introduced to us. We are introduced to historical characters, historical events. We're basically being spoon-fed information about this world. The series itself is known for kind of its fantasy, its dragons, stuff like that, and they're basically not there until the very end. So people got addicted to the politicking and kind of the drama happening and the world. So what kind of world building is he doing? Martin introduces so many cultures to us. There's 7 distinct kingdoms in Westeros, just Westeros. There's other parts of the world that Martin also introduces to us a little, like gives this little nibble of. But all 7 kingdoms have different cultures. They have different priorities within the kingdoms for the houses. Like there's small aspects within the cultures that just kind of grow and blossom in front of your eyes. Another element that Martin introduces, and I absolutely love, is religion. He explores religion heavily throughout the series, but also in the first book. There's old gods, there's new gods, there's like the Lord of Light, there's the God of Death. There's so many different gods, there's so many different religions that you're introduced to just in this first book. And then as the show and as the series, like in the books, goes on, it just keeps growing and you learn more and more and more about the religion. And it's just super fascinating, especially to me. In the first book, there are 9 point of view characters. And let me just tell you, not a lot of them are in the same place at the same time. And so we get to see all these different settings. We get to explore the far north, the Wall, as you may have heard. You get to experience cultures across the sea. You get to experience King's Landing from the point of view of like the Hand of the King, aka the right-hand man of the king, as well as his 2 daughters that experience very different aspects of court life at the capital. Not to mention some of the other characters spread out throughout Westeros. And then George is also great at world building with his people. And this kind of ties to the culture, but the people themselves all have pretty much different priorities. They have different allegiances. And with 9 POV characters, you may think it's overwhelming, it's too much, but it gives us different views into different facets of the culture, the gods and religion, the settings, and the people in the world building that Martin focuses on. Now you may hear 9 POV characters and just kind of go, what? 9? Like I've heard of 2 or 3 in romances, you know. Some high fantasy books will have like 4 or 5, but 9 point of view characters? How on earth? How does he keep it interesting? How does he keep everything straight? How does he have arcs for all 9 of these characters? And that is one of the talents of George R.R. Martin, because like every point where you're starting a new perspective in the book or even in the show following a new main character. Martin and the screenwriters make sure that that scene earns its keep. It's either kind of being prophetic, it's either giving you a little bit of world building, but it almost always is pushing that character's plot forward. A few examples. Dany, Daenerys Targaryen, you know, the dragon lady. She doesn't have the dragons at the beginning. She's just kind of a young girl being offered for marriage. That's her beginning. She kind of takes ownership of it. She starts adapting. She starts accepting the world and falling in love with her circumstances, making them work for herself. Spoilers. Tragedy befalls her. Pretty much everything that was getting built up for her in that season gets taken away from her. There is enough content in Dany's story to have a pretty satisfying little novella just by itself. Another one, Eddard Stark, you know, Ned. He starts out with a tough decision of, do I go down south? Do I go follow my king? Do I go serve him as his hand, as his right-hand man? He decides to do that, and along the way, he is met with constant conflict, and he, fun fact, is kind of the little detective in our mystery. He takes steps, he does things that result ultimately in his death. There's another full arc. This one would probably be like novel length. And the other point of views I want you to know are also interesting for the most part. Everyone, of course, is going to have a character or two that they can't stand reading, but Martin, for the most part, does a great job of characterizing each point of view character. Like Sansa, her chapters are written in such a manner that is different from Arya, her sister, who's going down south with her, with their father, aka Ned Stark. However, Martin doesn't have even these kind of lesser, less favored, like, oh, I gotta get through this just so I can get to the exciting POV character. These are not chapters, these are not POVs where people are just kind of sitting and talking, you know? Because that's what really kills the mood, is just having POV characters, or even just characters, or even like major chunks of your book where you're just having your characters sit and talk, unless it's a sit and talk type of book. I've got a few of those in the work myself. Martin makes sure, like I said earlier, that something interesting happens in pretty much every chapter. So they're not just sitting around like in House of Dragon, if you've watched the recent seasons. The reason people have been kind of complaining about season 2 for House of Dragon, in my opinion, is because the writers have too much characters sitting and talking, and just talking in circles around themselves, not even around each other. That would be fun. They're literally just like on repeat. They've got a playlist that's about 4 songs long, and they've got a 2-hour drive they're getting through, if you know what I mean. Again, not every book has to have a lot of action. Not every book has to have like boom, boom, like constant movement, stuff like that. It's okay if there's just mainly talking in your book, as long as this story progresses and continues. Another thing, and this is probably one of the best examples I can think of, one of the most common kind of writing questions that editors ask writers is, why did you start your book at this point in time? Some examples of why Martin does such a great job with this series is because he starts the series at a flash fire point in the Westerosi history. I know that sounds kind of silly, but he starts the book out when there's tension in the realm. A war had just been fought. The kingdom had just been won for the current king. At the beginning, current king's right-hand man mysteriously dies. That's a major event. There is movement of zombies, basically White Walkers, north of the wall. So things are starting to stir up. In Westeros, the summers and winters aren't like our summers and winters. In this world, the summers and the winters can last years. And so this is right at the end of a like 9-year summer or something like that. And it's going into what is predicted to be a super long, super harsh winter, people have been comparing it to the darkest day, which is basically where the zombie White Walkers storm down through Westeros and just try and kill everyone, basically. That's not all. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen is getting married off to a horse lord, basically being sold into this marriage so that her older brother can get an army to try and storm and take back the throne, the Iron Throne, the Game of Thrones, you know. Ned Stark's kids, for the most part, are all old enough that some of them are becoming like adults at the age of 14. He has some daughters that are close to marrying age. A lot of things are starting to happen already in the world. And then, of course, Dany gets her dragons, you know, Ned's beheaded, the North revolts. The Night Watch actually experience some White Walkers attacking them, like attacking them in their base, basically. And the king dies. There's a lot of interesting things already kind of starting to roll down the hill. And the why did you start your story here question is also one of the hardest ones to explain. And of course, and this is probably what you were expecting me to say when I first started this video, is that Martin has amazing, complex characters. Almost all of his characters have wants and needs, and most of the POV characters, those wants and needs are explored. If not in just the first book, they're explored throughout the series. For example, we'll start with Ned Stark, the guy that lost his head, if you will. He basically got punished for pursuing his want over his need. So he wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to be fair. He wanted to be true to everyone that he could. And it resulted in him being accused of treason and all this stuff. What he needed to do was he needed to play the Game of Thrones. He needed to not be so earnest. He needed to kind of keep things a little closer to the chest, if you will. Keep things in his head and not so much out in the open. However, Martin had already set up in the beginning of the book that Ned is a notoriously honest character. He is honest to a degree where it's detrimental to his health. And lastly, because I've been yapping way too long, it also does a good job of having a looming threat over it. Throughout the entire series, Martin makes sure that you remember that there is death on the way, that the characters are piddling, they're fighting, they're squabbling over this Iron Throne, and the zombies are coming for them. Because the zombies don't care about the throne, they don't care who's on the throne, they just want to, it's a lot of fun. It reminds you like, oh, there's all this going on here, but that's getting closer, that's getting bigger. I highly encourage, if you're wanting to write multiple POVs, if you're wanting to write kind of a longer series, if you're wanting to write fantasy or political or blah, 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 whatever, I highly recommend reading the series so that you can kind of see firsthand, you can experience firsthand George's writing techniques and hopefully come out of it a better writer. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. So I hope to see you soon.